Read about sex. Okay. Topics. Let's find out. Well, let's just sex. Yay, sex. Philosophy of race. All right, so what do we want? Gender, race, sexuality, sexual orientation, philosophy of sexuality, conceptions of sex. Can you read about cum stats? Homosexuality and morality, homosexual politics and law, topics in the philosophy of sexual orientation, or the nature of sex. Cum stats. Where would there be cum stats? Plinpin. I don't know, but let's conceptions of sex. No, I think it's just like ideas of it. Like babies, Valpo? No. Let's see. Modeling gender as multi-dimensional sore rights paradox. Wow. Just like wow. Like seriously? Foucault, history of sexuality. Yeah, we could look at something on Foucault. Let's just see if we have anything right here. Let's see if there's anything just like sex. 233, 250. That's 17 pages. Ugh. See if there's anything like a little short. Review. That's a review. Sex or no sex? Reproduction is not the question. Bio essays. Let's take a look. Let's take a look. See if it's available. Nope, not available. All right. Shoot. All right. Let's see. What else we got? Reviews. The body and the habit of sexual difference. 15. Ooh, human enhancement and sexual dimorphism. Let's see if that's available. Dagnabbit. Show up, somebody. Foucault and the... I hate these people sometimes. They gotta put their papers online. Okay. Oh, 35 pages. Oh my god. Alright, we're gonna read this like 35 double space though. That's painful. Oh, let's see. No, this is just crazy. Too crazy for me. Let's go. Let's give it another second. Let's see if we can find anything else. Dag, no, I shouldn't have done that. Sexual alterity and the real for thought. Monique David Menard. Interesting name. Brain, sex, and ideology. I want to see what that one is. Brain, sex, and ideology. Come on. Why is this not here? Here we go. 7 pages was what we're reading. Brain, sex, and... Can you just hit a random button and get... Not quite, but I can switch over to a different part of this site that only has papers. So it would have only ones that have papers. But it's a little different because you get what's it called? You get like older stuff. I like reading newer stuff is what it is. So, okay, we're going to read Brain, Sex, and Ideology in the Diogenes journal. Diogenes was an ancient philosopher who was famous for whacking off in public. And, yeah. And doing lots of other wacko things. But, like, it was an interesting philosophy because he was, as our buddy Aristotle... who is just here, I don't know if he's still here, he's writing a paper on Diogenes. Diogenes donating to Evan today. So Diogenes, that's right. Evan was talking about Diogenes? What were you saying, Evan? Yeah, so this is the name of the journal, like, seriously. Like, Diogenes. Yeah. So, yeah. And so here's what we're going to do. Brain, Sex, and Ideology by Catherine Vidal. Yeah, he jerked in public. Very famous. Famously did so. And the whole point was someone was like, Diogenes, what are you doing? And he's like, he started rubbing his belly. He's like, man, I just wish, like, that's all it took to make me less hungry. It's like, because he was whacking off, and they're like, okay, so you're hungry, but you decide to whack off instead. I was like, I guess that's a strategy. And then later Diogenes $5 and said, I be cooming for all along. Yes, that sounds like Diogenes too. Okay, so Catherine Vidal. And yeah, this is Philosophy Roulette 243. And everyone, feel free to ask questions, because like this is my first time reading it, but it's like this is just, we're screwing around, seeing what people have to say, and we try and figure out if they say anything smart, but we don't know. So, does a sexual brain exist? There's no simple answer to this question. Indeed, the brain is the origin of thoughts, and that makes it different from any other organ. As such, it is both a biological and cultural organ. Lying behind the original question is the debate between nature and culture. And in this debate, science and ideology are closely linked. The topic of brain and sex is a perfect example of this. It concerns everybody, and the media loves the matter. This can be seen in the following headlines, which appeared recently in the press. Science proves that men and women think differently. If I'm stupid, it's mummy's fault. Are homosexuals born that way? Why do men never listen? Why can't women read a map? These titles were all echoing articles published in the scientific press that tended to demonstrate differences between men and women's brains, and also between heterosexuals and homosexuals' brains. A sharp and methodological look at the data that are in the origin of these conclusions reveal how the reality of scientific facts can be far from their interpretation. Okay, so what it looks like here is we're going to be interpreting how people read facts into like sexual difference in people's thought. Like people we're going to be reading into how like sex differences affect the concepts people have. Okay. Brain volume, sex, and intelligence. In the 19th century, many studies tried to determine the possible link between brain size and intelligence in men and women. For years, Paul Broca, a French anatomist, worked on dead bodies using two methods. One consisted of filling skulls with lead shot and weighing them to get an estimate of brain volume. The other method was to remove and weigh the brains. Broca found that men's brains were heavier by 181 grams compared to women's. He stated, "One wonders whether the smaller size of women's brains is due to the small size of their bodies. But let's keep in mind that women are, on average, slightly less intelligent than men. Therefore, one can conclude that the smaller brain of women is explained by their inferiority in both size and intelligence." Please don't clip me. However, at that time, it was known, including by Broca himself, that brain size varies among individuals with age and body height. This was clearly demonstrated by the study of brains of famous writers and scientists who offered their body to science. For instance, the brain of Anatoly France weighed 1 kilogram, while that of Turgenev weighed 2 kilograms. Wow, so this guy had half the size of brain of the other one. But for Broca and his colleagues, ideology was stronger than scientific objectivity. On average, the brain mass is larger in men than in women, in clever men than in ordinary ones, and in superior racers than inferior ones. There is an obvious relationship between intelligence and brain volume. You know what the best part about all these are? Whenever they actually, like, if Broca donated his brain to science, it's like inevitable that his brain was like smaller. And even nowadays, the idea of linking intelligence and brain size is still alive. Lenin and Einstein's brains were weighed, sliced up, and carefully studied. A research institute was dedicated to Lenin's brain. Nothing came out of this research. In 1992, the question of the link between IQ and brain size was once again debated in a paper submitted to the scientific journal Nature. This study was based on data coming from American Army archives relating to size of helmets and uniforms. The study showed that the skull size was larger in men than in women, in whites than in blacks, and in officers compared to privates. Considering that the study was not politically correct, Nature refused to publish it. Nevertheless, the author managed to get it published in another international journal. Okay, so like... yeah, being a fathead was apparently being smart. Brain and sexual reproduction. As far as biology is concerned, the brains of men and women are indeed different because sexual reproduction involves hormones and sexual behavior controlled by the brain. At fetal stage, the sexing of the brain begins. J. Swole 3 says if Einstein's brain just happened to be huge, then people would really believe that. Yeah, you know what's interesting? This has actually evolved into, oh wow, moon is like, it's like almost a full moon. It's like so bright out there. Oh my god, the moon is so bright. Anyway, but I was going to say is people have been, talking about, you know, like smooth brain, and like then you've got like the folded brain, and like smooth brain is supposed to be like stupid, and foldy brain is supposed to be like super smart. So in some sense they've adapted this, that there's some sort of physical representation of brains, but these ideas never die. So it's not just like smart, it's not just size, but like how it's folded over, as opposed to smooth brain, which you see a bit online nowadays. I see smooth brain apes buying GameStop. Okay. So yeah, at fetal stage, the sexing of the brain begins. At the beginning of the embryo's development, the genetic sex, XX for women and XY for men, induces the formation of sexual organs, ovaries, and testes. They start very early to produce sexual hormones, which are released in the blood and of the fetus, and so enter its brain. Isn't smooth brain just an actual physical disorder? It can be. I think it can be. I think there are some people that smooth brain is actually a problem. I think there's some people where it's not as much of a problem. Maybe too smooth a brain, it really is. But yeah, it's in most humans there's folds, and some people there isn't, and I think some people it is a problem for. But I'm not a doctor, so don't take my word for it. But there's a reason why. That may be one of the reasons why smooth brain is being used online as a joke for being stupid at this point. Walker Spire says the surface area intelligence correlation is actually backed up when looking at different species. Okay, so the folds increase surface area, and that's what's correlated. Interesting. Olamano doesn't have to do with the like ratio of gray to white matter because of surface area. Yeah, apparently. Oh, that's what Walker said. Also, something to do with surface area. I don't know. Like, no one had, like, maybe there is, like, a correlation there, but, like, how does, like, surface, like, are, like, squares smarter than, like, circles because they have more surface area? Like, I don't actually understand any of the science because I don't study it, first of all, but, like, really, like, maybe there's, even if there is a correlation there, what does the correlation amount to, actually? I don't know, like... It's good to know that there is such a correlation, but like, what does that show us in some sense? And that's the same thing here. Like, if something weighed more, that just means there's more brain matter, but like, that doesn't mean it's in some sense organized in the right way. It's like, just because you are taller doesn't make you smarter. It's like, why should tallness and that matter? And why should weight? And sometimes there might be organizational things that have to do with it. And maybe that's what the folds do. Maybe that is a form of organization, but we don't understand that. So, but like, these are the questions. This is exactly the questions that this author is like trying to get at here. Yeah, exactly, J. Swole. Just because it's bigger doesn't mean it's filled with anything. Gray matter is on the surface and does different functions than white matter. No clue how those impact actual performance. That's the thing. We can look at the mass, but do we actually understand how the mass is organized and what's going on? I don't think so. Okay. So, we're talking about here, though, is that the male and female hormones do get into the blood and affect the brain. Yeah, so... When I was in college, I was taking philosophy of cognitive science, and... You know, I didn't drink any coffee back then. And I drink a lot of coffee now, but it doesn't actually make me any smarter. But, like, my teacher was just like, you know, the average firing rate of your brain cells goes up when you drink coffee. So there is a heightened state of brain neuron firing when you're on caffeine. That's a fact. So I asked him, I said, well, has anyone compared the state of being caffeinated to the state of confusion? Is the confusion a higher state of, like, neuron firing? And he thought for a second, goes, no one's ever looked at confusion versus being caffeinated. And I said, okay. And I like shrugged. Because, it's like these things correlate, but again, the causal thing is extremely difficult. I can guarantee you that beer makes you dumber. Because I've played a lot of Minesweeper while drinking beer, and I dropped 6 seconds of Minesweeper times per beer. So the first one's about 6, and then after that it's like 7-8 seconds for every subsequent beer. And then eventually it just drops off the map where I'm just like, I can't even finish a game. But I can guarantee you, if you want to see exactly why you shouldn't drink and drive, play Minesweeper and then drink 1 beer, and you will see how fast you drop off. Okay. They start very early to produce sexual hormones, which are released into the blood. And, keep the questions coming. They're fun. We can talk about this because it's a fun topic. Which are released into the blood of the fetus and so enter its brain. This early hormonal impregnation affects the formation of neuronal circuits that later in adulthood will be involved in the control of reproductive functions. This developmental program is the same for all mammals. It is a result of evolution and indeed a necessary process for species survival. Alright, so the point is here, your brain has to control your reproduction. And so the development of the brain has to be developed in a way that it can control reproduction. And so there has to be something in your brain, they think, to actually, make your dick hard or make you like ovulate or whatever it is. Sex and cognitive functions. In 1982, a neuroanatomical study showed that the corpus callosum, a bundle of fibers connecting the 2 cerebral hemispheres, was thicker in women than in men. Consequently, women would have a better communication between the 2 hemispheres. This was supposed to explain a so-called capacity of women to perform various tasks simultaneously, which would not be the case for men. One should keep in mind that this statement was based upon a small sample of 20 brains described in the study. Since that time, thousands of brains have been examined. Statistically, no difference between men and women was found. In spite of this evidence, the story of the corpus callosum has a long-lasting life in the media. Is one of these things. Rumors travels a lot faster than truth. It's just, oh my god, there's a difference between men and women and it's biological. Okay, sorry. Another attractive topic for the media is how differently men and women use their left and right brain. The left hemisphere would explain the better ability of women with language, whereas men would be better in maths and spatial memory because of their right brain. Nowadays, the original 2 brains theory is no longer relevant, having been challenged by new experimental tools such as brain imaging. A new vision of the brain has emerged since we can now see the brain at work. These new means of investigation have revealed that the 2 hemispheres never work independently. Moreover, a given brain region can control various types of functions. Conversely, a given function is never located in a single region. According to Broca's studies, it was thought that language was located in a specific area of the left hemisphere. Brain imaging has shown that at least 10 different brain areas are devoted to language in both hemispheres. The same holds true for arithmetic calculation, which activates the frontal and posterior brain regions in both men and women. The theory of the 2 brains is also a long-lasting one. In the 1970s, the theory was widely used by hippies in their quest for new spirituality. They put rationality and occidental values in the left brain, while the right brain was supposed to be the center of affects, transcendental ideals, and oriental values. This bipolar view of the brain, although out of date, is still attractive to the media. Yeah. See, this is the craziness. Interestingly enough, Walker Spider says they can study the 2 hemispheres working independently when the corpus callosum is severed. Oh yeah. Just because you break the connection, the brain still works, but like a lot of weird things happen at that point. I was gonna say something about this. Shoot. Anyhow, all right. Oh, that's what it was. You know what this really comes down to? We have not gotten away from the old, what was that called? Shoot, I'm blanking out. The old, 1800s theories where you've got, little spots here. This part does this part does this part does this. It was that old theory where you just, like a homunculus, not a homunculus, dagnabbit, I forget the word, but like there was that old theory where there was like little bits everywhere. Phrenology, thank you, cryonics. We have not gotten away from phrenology. We never got away from it. We still think of things in terms of like phrenology, and it's kind of, it really never died. It just moved around. And so it moved left, right. It moved like to different pieces going different ways. But you got to think of this. If you think of just this is like the new phrenology, it actually all makes sense because we never got rid of it. Okay. Thank you, cryonics. In 1991, the American anatomist Simon Levay published a study in the journal Science comparing the brains of men, women, and homosexual men. He found differences in the region of the hypothalamus, which is involved in the control of sexual hormones. Although the difference was rather small, 1/10 of a millimeter, Levay did not hesitate to claim that he had found in the brain a biological substrate of homosexuality. So, 1/10 of a millimeter. It should be stressed that this opinion is far from being shared by the scientific community, not only because its ideological implications, but especially because the experimental data are not convincing. Indeed, all the homosexual men studied had died from AIDS. This point is a major bias in the study, as the AIDS virus may invade the brain, causing important lesions. Thus, comparing AIDS virus-infected brains with other brains is not valid, and it is not very surprising that other scientists had never replicated Levay's findings. Moreover, how could 1/10 of a millimeter of brain determine homosexuality when we know that sexual orientation might vary according to each individual's life? Up to now, there is no scientific evidence that brain, hormones, or genes cause homosexuality. Some 10 years ago, a researcher claimed to have found a gene for homosexuality. Since then, the findings have been disproved, but the media made a successful story out of it, and people keep on believing that this gene exists. It is important to point out that the above studies were published in Nature and Science in spite of their lack of rigorous data. This is becoming the trend for topics like brain, sex, and behavior, which are important issues for the media. And this is the thing. Clickbait sold back in the day too. It's not a modern problem of the internet. There was always clickbait. It just happened to take slightly different forms. And this is exactly what it was back in the day. You'd be like, oh, I found the cause of homosexuality. No, you didn't. But that is what clickbait is. And that just existed back in the day. Okay. Yeah. We're not smart things, just in general, like humans. Brain plasticity and cognitive functions. For 15 years or so, brain imaging studies have led to spectacular progress in our knowledge of the brain. It is important to stress that out of more than 1,000 studies on higher cognitive functions, only a few dozen have shown differences between men and women. The main reason is that our brains are all different. For instance, if you look at the brains of several subjects performing the same mental calculation, it appears that no one uses their brain the same way. Thus, brain variability between individuals exceeds variability between men and women, which is therefore the exception. So it is really interesting, actually, that between any of us, we're more different than if you group men and women like separately. That like there's more difference between me and you than there is between like men in general and women in general. And I think we're finding out just like the different like the normal versus not normal, like neurodivergent, like it gets really weird if you try to like pin it down, because certain people are just completely different and they're not stupid and they're basically pretty normal, and it's like neurodivergent is like that is more the norm than actually being able to group people together. And so this whole old phrenology where you could point out differences based on like parts is just nuts. Okay, the origin of such variability is a fundamental question. Is it innate or is it acquired? Much progress has been made in understanding the role of genes and environmental factors in the building of the brain. The human brain is made of 100 billion neurons, which form circuits and communicate by means of 1,000,000,000 billion synapses. On average, each neuron is connected to 10,000 others. These figures are astronomical compared to the 6,000 genes present in the brain. This means that there are not enough genes to control the formation of the billions of synapses. What is the function of these genes? They play a key role during the development of the embryo. They set up the basis of the brain's anatomy. They control the formation of the hemispheres, the cerebellum, the brainstem, etc. At birth, the main lines of the brain's architecture are defined, and the neurons stop multiplying. However, the brain is far from complete. 90% of the synapses will be built gradually after birth. In this process, the environment plays a major role, including both internal factors, hormones, nutrition, diseases, and external influences, family, education, social interactions. We talk of plasticity to describe this ability of the brain to shape itself according to life experience. I did not know that 90% of the synapses will be built after birth. 90. So that means you're not even 10% formed when you're like little. So that means 90% of everything is like, well, that's the rest 90 years of your life. So, cool. Brain imaging clearly demonstrates this. An experiment carried out with violinists has shown that the brain region that controls the left hand is much larger than the region that controls the right hand. I guess because a violin, you do the frets with your left. So, like I guess with the guitar, same thing. And then the strumming is less important because you're just plucking away. Violin, you got the bow. This result is explained by the fact that the fingers of the left hand are far more active on the violin neck, unlike those of the right hand, which hold the bow. Moreover, this increase in brain surface is greater if the future violinist has started to practice early in life, that is, between the ages of 5 and 10, when brain plasticity is particularly high. But this does not mean that children who start playing later will not get the chance to become good musicians. Their brains will simply use other strategies for learning. The plasticity process also goes on in adults through experience and learning. A brain imaging study on taxi drivers has revealed an expansion of brain in regions of controlling spatial representation. In addition, the increase in the surface is proportional to the number of years of taxi driving practice. That's cool. These results demonstrate how experience in life influences brain functions. Our personal history is thus carved in our brains throughout our lives. As a result, no one has exactly the same brain, not even identical twins. See, that's interesting. So just any little thing going on in your life will like butterfly into like a different kind of brain. So that's kind of fun. This is one of the questions also is, if you got cloned, would your clone be the same as you? Well, you sort of butterfly effect away as soon as like anything happens to like you and the clone, which is exactly what happens as soon as the clone is standing like over there or something. If the clone's over there, they're seeing something different from you, and immediately like your brains start to diverge. And so the question is that you anymore as soon as it's over there? Well, kind of is, kind of isn't. So, questions. And yeah, if you guys have more questions, please ask away. Men, women, otherwise. Psychology and sex. These arguments taken together provide strong evidence for the major role played by sociocultural factors in differentiating cognitive aptitudes between men and women. Nevertheless, the opposite position is still favored by some scientific circles, particularly in the USA and Canada. Shoot, you gotta go. Thank you for the raid. I hope you had we've been talking about how Evan is probably, anyone named Evan is on the lower side of the intelligence, and everyone else is pretty normal. Basically, no, I'm kidding. I'm sorry, Evan. That's not true. Basically, this author has been just hammering anytime like people are trying to show that there's a difference between like men and women. It turns out, yes, once I was there when you dropped out. That was a fun stream. But yeah, basically there's more difference between me and you than there is between like men in general and women in general. That the differences between brains is like everyone's unique, and so it's like a butterfly effect. Everyone has a slightly different brain. There's general regions where stuff happens, but that's not even true, because once they actually were able to like see what was going on in the brain, it's completely different. Now not different, it's that a whole lot of things are all happening at once. So the Question is, well, what happens as like men and women diverge? Because the brain has to, control the different parts of the bodies that are obviously different between the different sexes. Well, that's what we're talking about now. So, we're all smooth brain here. These arguments taken together provide strong evidence for the major role played by sociocultural factors in differentiating cognitive aptitudes between men and women. Nevertheless, the opposite position is still favored by some scientific circles, particularly in the US and Canada. They claim the innate differences in mental capacity between men and women determine their social and professional representation. For instance, they consider that there is no point in encouraging women to study science and maths. They do not choose these topics because their natural tendency does not push them. Most of the arguments behind these deterministic ideas are based on psychological tests. Women are generally better at languages, while men show better performance in spatial orientation. What conclusions can we draw from these tests? First of all, one should bear in mind that demonstrating sex differences does not provide clues to determining the origin of these differences. Are they innate or acquired? Concerning verbal, spatial, and mathematical aptitudes, a number of arguments do not support the innate origin. First, sex differences are detected from adolescence and not before. Moreover, they gradually disappear after a few days training in performing the tests. They have also been reported to be more marked in whites than in other ethnic communities like Black and Asian, thus showing the influence of cultural environment. So that's interesting. It says like the fact that they were probably only testing the like middle class white kids in college meant that that they were finding out how middle class white kids in college were brought up differently, and as soon as they didn't look at the white middle class and kids that are like the standard like people that are given like college tests, they looked at Black and Asian folks. The problems that exist in white middle class families didn't show up anymore. Maybe not the problems, but the culturally specific issues between how boys and girls are treated. Then they didn't show up because other cultures, they may have their own problems, but they don't have the same ones that of the white kids that they were probably looking at. Cultural environment. This point has been stressed by sociological studies on the role of upbringing. In our Western societies, young boys are often trained in outdoor sports such as soccer, for which they need to acquire skills in spatial orientation. The Walker Spider says, the nature versus nurture debate often tends towards nurture. We're really all the same at birth, and society shapes us into what we are as individuals. Yeah, I think that's exactly where this paper is going to. This is just sort of a review of how people's interpretation of that on the brain is sort of wrong, and it still comes more down to nurture. As described above, such an early training can influence brain development and induce the formation of neuronal circuits involved in spatial orientation. This ability would be less likely in young girls who stay at home more, a situation that favors the use of language to communicate. Finally, a compilation of psychological tests published in the last 20 years shows a progressive reduction in sex differences concomitant with women's increase in integration into social and professional life. All right, so we're getting to the end. This is the last page here. The development of genetics has brought new opportunities to the supporters of the innate behavioral differences between men and women. Evan says, I think it's nurture for a significant amount of your childhood. Yeah, and that's what they're arguing here. It says, if you look for the biological, like physical basis, you're only going to find differences between people, but not generalities. So if like you split stuff up and you're looking for differences, you're going to find it, but you're going to find those differences all over the place. And there's nothing special about men and women, the differences between men and women, because you're going to find it between men and men and women and women and women. So it's all sort of a wash. A good example is the discovery of the gene of marital fidelity found in wild rodents, specifically in voles. There are two species of vole living in different natural environments. The prairie voles are monogamous and stay in the nest with their offspring. In contrast, male voles living in mountains are polygamous and run away from the nest. American scientists put these voles in a laboratory to study their brains and genes. They found differences between the two species in some brain areas which control the action of the hormone vasopressin. So they wondered whether vasopressin injected into the vole's brain could influence fidelity behavior. But how to measure fidelity in a laboratory? The researchers designed a test with two cages linked by a tunnel. In one cage was a female vole that had been previously anesthetized to prevent any risk of sexual attraction. A male vole was placed in the other cage just after having received an intracerebral injection of vasopressin. What happened when the tunnel door was opened? The promiscuous mountain vole sniffed the female for 1 minute and then lost interest. In contrast, when it was the turn of the faithful prairie vole, the sniffing lasted for 2 minutes. Thus, the authors concluded that 1 minute's sniffing difference was evidence that fidelity behavior was linked to the genetic code for vasopressin. Obviously, such interpretation is far beyond the experimental data. Nevertheless, the paper was accepted for publication by Nature, but circumstances were favorable. This happened in 1999, at the time of the Clinton-Lewinsky case. It was thus easy to excuse the president who simply lacked the good gene. I mean, there's more to be said about what you like to sniff at that point, though, isn't there? And I don't know what voles like sniffing, but I don't know. Maybe there's, questions. Sorry. All right, let's finish this up. In the 19th century, the size of the brain was used to justify the hierarchy. So here's what we got back to. This is what I meant on phrenology. This is all this is. This is just like new phrenology. In the 19th century, the size of the brain was used to justify the hierarchy between men and women, races, and social classes. Nowadays, brain imaging and genetics have led to important progress in our understanding of the fascinating complexity of the human brain. However, the ideology of biological determinism is still alive. The use of biology as a tool to account for social hierarchy is still a major threat. This concept erases sociocultural and political factors from any consideration of what creates major inequalities between men and women. This is the whole point. Right here. If it happens to be a natural phenomenon, all the responsibility gets taken away from people being crappy. People can excuse themselves for being crappy because it wasn't me, it was my genetics. It wasn't me, it was my biology. It wasn't me. And so this is just a different way to dodge responsibility politically, culturally, all the time. And so that's why you get racism and all this stuff, because they're saying it's somehow genetic, and it ain't. It just ain't. It's people being lazy mostly. The persistence of deterministic ideas is fed by the ambiguous intricacy between society and science. Why do some scientists keep on promoting it, and in North America more than Europe? Why do the famous scientific journals Nature and Science contribute to the support of these ideas? Why do feminist movements, which 20 years ago rejected the idea of biological differences between men and women, accept it today and use it to justify their claims? The answers to these questions are closely related to the recent boom in biology and biotechnologies. The trend is to reduce both body and mind to a bunch of neurons, genes, and molecules. The same is true for gender, which is reduced to biological sex. The threat is that so-called biological evidence would conveniently justify racism and sexism. It is the responsibility of scientists and citizens to stand against the misuse of science for ideological purposes. Okay, there we go. I mean, this is a short article, but it's just it's trying to hammer home the point that every time someone is trying to basically justify their crappy beliefs using science and biology, they're doing bad science. It's just, you can't get these big sort of conclusions out of, science is harder than that. You don't get giant conclusions. You find little things. If anything, the sniffing of the voles you might be able to understand something about. But you're not going to understand about the vole's promiscuity, and even less about human promiscuity, about some gene in the voles. That's just amazing and nonsense. It's funny. But science is hard, and you don't get these generalities. But people want to justify their bullshit, basically what it comes down to. And it's hard because, everyone's got bullshit and people want to justify it. But what are you going to do? All right, do we got any more questions on this? Because I don't have anything else to say. I mean, this was a little bit of a fun paper, as well as why we read it for you guys. But like, this is, it's like you go and you look. We're basically doing phrenology from 1861. I don't know if you can see it, but like Broca is in 1861. So that's kind of what's happening. We're getting these old ideas. They never die. So, oh, and actually, this is a paper from 2005. I don't know if you can see that either. But like, yeah, 2005. So it's not a new paper actually. So, well, I hope you like the paper from Diogenes' journal. Let's see. Okie doke. I'm kind of tired now. I have to finish the rest of my beer. Anyone else got any questions about this? Because I'm gonna end stream. I'll hopefully be back soon. Like I said before, I've had some extra Twitch things going crazy in my life, but that happens. And they're still crappy, but maybe they've stabilized, I hope. At least I kind of hope. See if anyone's streaming that I want to go raid. If not, I'll just get out of here.